Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 271 of the Strength Coach Podcast, the official podcast of Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. I'm your host, Anthony Renda, and the show notes are located at continuefit.com. That's also where you can find out more about my book, Be Like the Best, and the Be Like the Best workbook. The book consists of 50 interviews with top fitness pros, and after each interview is a Be Like, which is just an action step or a challenge that'll help you be like the best. The workbook is a collection of those Be Likes, all 50 of them, with room for notes and places to write down part of the challenges and action steps. You can check all that out at continuefit.com. All right, today I spoke to Coach Boyle about coaching cues for speed work. We talked about Lee Taft's acceleration arms video. That's actually where I got the idea about the coaching cues. And we talked about strength standards for high school female athletes. For the Results Fitness University Business and Fitness segment, I'm on with Rachel Cosgrove to talk about offering employees health insurance and benefits. For the TrainHeroic data-driven coaching segment, Adam Doughty talks to Tim Robinson. They're going to add to their discussion on training variables. Today, they discuss training to failure. Check out TrainHeroic.com to start your free 14-day trial. Let them know I sent you. You'll save 10% off the first year of the TrainHeroic Pro or Elite editions. All right, for the BodyByBoyleOnline.com, hit the gym with the Strength Coach segment. I got on Andy Galpin. He's the professor as well as the director of Center for Sport Performance at CSU Fullerton. He's also the co-author of the book Unplugged. We talked about some of the lab work that he's doing, how he's fitting that into working with his athletes, how heavy to lift to maximize power. We got really into that pretty deep. We talked about complex and contrast training, acceleration, resisted versus assisted speed work. We kind of dove into a bunch of different topics here. So much interesting stuff with Andy. So that's coming up in a little bit. Lots of things to get to. So let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, now it's time for the StrengthCoach.com Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle. StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. You can try it out for 3 days, just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day answering questions. Check it out at StrengthCoach.com. Coach, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I keep trying to think I should probably write down some other response and then give it, because I always tell you the same thing, but it's true. I'm always doing great.
Yeah, I should just, maybe I should come up with some words and then like before the interview, just kind of be like, Coach, say you're fantastic or whatever.
Stupendous.
There you go. Coach, you know what, really quick, I'm going to divert here. There was a great article on your daughter and transferring schools, and it was so nice to read and like kind of see her journey. And I didn't realize, as much as I talk to you and we talk about her off air, that she was struggling to kind of find another school. And it's just amazing the way things work out because she's so comfortable there. She's doing amazing. And really congratulations on that. That I know was a tough journey for you guys.
Yeah, it has worked out great for her and really great for us in terms of Clarkson wasn't the easiest place in the world to get to. So Pittsburgh's an hour and 20-minute JetBlue flight, which is much nicer than a 6-hour car ride. And yeah, it's interesting because she's been really good about kind of sharing her story, and people have liked it and realized, because I think it's like so many times when people are struggling, they don't say anything. And she was pretty open about transferring and wrote an article about it, and then was open about this process. And obviously she didn't write this article, but I think it was Women's Hockey Life that did that one.
Yeah.
And I think it will be helpful for other girls who are struggling, because sometimes you do need a change of venue. Sometimes you need to go someplace else and start over. And that's not, I think, the hardest part for her. And I think I read the article, but I'm not 100% sure. There was that feeling of quitting.
Yeah.
And I think what was hard for her was that idea of, I'm quitting. I should stick it out. I've been taught to not quit and to stick it out and, make things better, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is sometimes it's like, it's better to start over. And she landed in a great place with great people, so it's worked out really well.
Yeah. And it's funny. Another thing I wasn't going to talk about, but you mentioned this about her kind of expressing this struggle. And did you see Fergus Connolly's TEDx talk?
Yes, I did actually. I watched it. Yep. And that's what I love. And it's funny. I love Fergus's talk. And it's the same thing I've talked about with Brett, the first part of Brett's book, Brett Bartholomew.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing when people talk to you about their struggle, I think it's helpful. I think it's helpful for a lot of people. So he's in a situation where, like with whether it's Fergus, talking about, hey, some bad stuff happened, and Brett talking about. Brett's. I've always thought, like I said, Brett's initial chapter of that book sold me on the whole book.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure, you know what I mean? I was like, I knew Brett, I wasn't sure. But then I read that and I'm like, wow, to be able to be that honest and that open and that authentic and really kind of lay your life out there for people. And he told me when I did a podcast with him that I think the editor said you probably shouldn't publish that stuff.
Yeah.
And felt like it was essential to the book. And he was right, because to me, it made the whole book for me. It made everything else in the book so much more believable, because here's a guy who's being kind of as open, as honest as you can possibly be. And it's the same thing with Fergus. Fergus it's not a great story, but you get up there and you tell the story and you realize that, hey, I made some mistakes and I'm trying to improve myself. And, Fergus's, Brett was lucky in terms of there wasn't the same cost that there was. Fergus's, mistakes were both personally and professionally expensive for him in terms of being able to do it. So, I watched, as soon as he posted that talk, he had sent me the link and I watched it, because you'll remember we brought him in for a Body by Boyle Online. And I did it because I knew that I wanted to help him to kind of self-promote a bit and be able to get out in front of it in terms of, get people to see what a talented guy he was and what a great speaker he was. Because I think prior to his situation at Michigan, I think he was a name that you saw, but he was flying under the radar because he was working so much.
Yeah.
And then when I kind of saw what had happened, I said, hey, here's a guy who I'd love to bring in and let speak and be in a situation where people can hear him. And his presentation was kick-ass. He really has a wealth of experience at, the 49ers and Premier League and Michigan. And, he's just been at the highest levels of sport and seen it in a very different way. So
yeah,
he's good. If you look at Brett, Brett might be one of the hottest young names in the field. And a lot of it is because he's been able to capitalize on that book.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with going back to Fergus, what the part for anybody that hasn't seen it, he talks about, different kinds of, a sheepdog. A sheepdog protects the sheep, right? And the bottom line is, when you're a sheepdog, sometimes you think you're always in this protective mode, and you won't look for help. You won't make those calls. And it wasn't until he really started to realize that he needed to, when people called him, like, hey, why didn't you call me? Why didn't you call me, talk? I'm here for you. And once he started to realize that, things started to change for him, and he started to realize that he needed, like he says in the lecture, sometimes a sheepdog needs another sheepdog. So really good stuff. Highly recommended that everybody go out and listen to that. It's only 13 minutes long. It's awesome. So good stuff.
Yeah, it's really good. And it's interesting if you're interested. I'm just looking at this guy's name. I want to see if I got it right. because that sheepdog is actually the name of a book. And I saw I went to the NSCA tactical convention a couple of years ago and spoke. And one of the other speakers was a guy he was Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, and he wrote a book called Sheepdogs, because the sheepdog analogy comes from, at least in his book, special forces guys who really are, they talk about the idea that you have to find sheepdogs, you can't make them. Because that was one of the things that he said in his book, is that, sheepdogs are rare. People with this natural protective instinct that will keep the wolves away from the sheep. And it was really interesting when he did his talk at the NSCA Tactical. He got up in front of everybody and he started talking about sheepdogs, and he said, I just want to explain to you guys that you're more than likely all sheep. He said, and I don't mean to insult you. And he had a picture up there of a special forces guy. I don't know what branch the guy was, and he was kind of like, what's wrong with this picture? And you literally can see in the picture that everyone is running in one direction, and this guy is facing in the other direction with his gun. And he has a little kid clinging to his leg. He goes, that's the sheepdog. He said, you got to find those guys. You can't make them. He said, this guy just turned. He knows something bad just happened. Everybody else is running away, and he turned towards the problem. And he's protecting a child at the same time. It might have been one of the best talks I've ever seen. If you ever get a chance to see this guy, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, he wrote a book, actually interesting, called On Killing, the Psychological Cost of Learning to Kill in War and Society. And he also wrote a book, it's kind of a children's book called Sheepdogs, but it's pretty interesting. He actually wrote another one called On Combat. He's a prolific author and just an amazingly powerful speaker.
Very cool. Yeah, and Fergus was that's where he got it from. He did say he was in front of these special forces guys. So very cool.
Exactly.
Interesting stuff. Coach, let's turn it around here. Lee Taft talked about, we posted a video called Acceleration Arms. And essentially, I'll let everybody know, was basically Lee was talking about how much limb length matters early on in acceleration, essentially trying to make sure that the opposite arm in the stride has to get really long early on. And, because that the arm, that long arm will also, the legs will do the same thing, right? And so there needs to be more ground contact time early on in acceleration. I want to remind everybody that early on, keep saying that. And if the arm swing is short and quick, then the legs will be short and quick. And so one of the cues that he uses is to kind of throw your hands back early on. I'm not asking you if you're agreeing with this. I just wanted to see what other things that you're talking about from a technical standpoint, because there does come a point when you have somebody, it can't just be running as that's the only thing that they're doing, that they're getting better. Some people just don't run well, and I'm going to talk to you about somebody in a minute, but what are some other things that you're trying to do to kind of teach people to sprint?
Well, it's interesting. We don't do that much. And I said that, I tweeted something out yesterday. Our speed program is basically time sprinting. And really, I think everything we do up to time sprinting, I would consider to be warm up. But there are things that we do, where, we're skipping and butt kicking and high knee running. And then we're running, we're doing our acceleration ladder runs, which are basically kind of like we've talked about, sort of like the wicked idea of a gradual increasing stride length pattern. But the biggest thing, and that's why it's funny I've stopped coaching arms a lot, because I feel like we coached arms wrong, and Lee's right about this. We very often coach, we just repeat what we hear. 90-90, shoulder to hip, whatever it is. And then you realize it, like he was saying, in acceleration, if you look, people's arms get almost straight, which is against what we would be telling them to do a lot of the time if we were doing drills. And so what I've done is just started saying, it's just that idea, push the ground as hard as you can. That is, I hate it. It sounds moronic, and I understand, but it's probably 90% of the sprint coaching that I do. Push the ground as hard as you can. Push yourself forward. And there's not a huge, and I say there's not a huge amount of teaching, but we're doing plyos, we're pushing sleds, we're running with sleds. There's other things that are going on, obviously. So I think what you end up with from a speed development standpoint is a very synergistic effect in terms of you've got all of these things happening at, relatively speaking, the same time, in terms of we're doing our warm-up, and a lot of our warm-up looks like speed development drills. And then we're doing our warm-up runs, and our warm-up drills are speed development drills. And then after we're done, we're going out and pushing a heavy sled, which looks like acceleration mechanics. So I could look in some way and say, oh, we're doing acceleration mechanics work with the sleds, and we're doing, speed, technical work during our warm-up, and we are. So, but the reality is it's all going into running those 3 or 4 times 10s.
All right, cool. So I think there's an article in there actually with like what you just said. There's a lot of things that you are doing that are important to you because they're going to kill, check a couple of boxes off here as a warm up, as ankle mobility, as, all these things that are going to lead to hopefully being better sprinters.
Yes, that's I'm writing that down right now.
Okay, good. Yeah, because I think there's plenty in there that you do. And, it's funny. I'm going to talk to you next time about the Boosh Next Nighter article about plyometrics because, he's wondering where they've gone with a lot of people. And we'll talk about that next episode. But yeah, I think there's something in there. Coach, I wanted to finish up with this one, though. Somebody was asking about relative strength standard and goals for high school female athletes. And I think you had posted Brendan Rearick's male ones like trap bar, double body weight, hang clean, 1.25 to 1.5 body weight, chin up, 1.25 to 1.5 body weight, bench press, same thing, and rear foot elevated split squat, same thing. You lowered them for the women, 1.5 body weight for hang clean. Trap bar was 1.5, chin up 1 to 1.25. Can you what does that mean? Chin up with 1 to 1.25. Do you mean can they do one chin up at body weight or
right?
What
one chin up.
That's it.
Yeah, for a girl.
Yeah.
I think a girl who can do a chin up is pretty strong. And then so if you're looking at 1 to 1.25, so now a quarter, if you're talking 100, if you're talking about a 150-pound female, you're talking about being able to potentially do one chin up with 40 pounds, which means you might be able to do 5 or 6 chin ups. Yeah. So I would say the range would be 1 to 6 would be good. Our girls are way beyond that. But I think, what I was trying to do was give people a more realistic look at what averages might be. And so I think that's, to me, a more realistic look at because we're talking about average in terms of if we really think we were talking about this today in the staff meeting. George Carlin said, the bad part about the average IQ is that half the people in the world are dumber than that. But it's so when you're thinking about average, you've got half the women can't do a chin up, and then the other side, half the women might be able to do 5, 10, whatever it is. So, but I think in general, a female that can do, if you can do 5 chin ups as a female, you're pretty strong. You won't go into a whole lot of gyms and see too many sets of 5 chin ups. I've been around, we get some freaks of nature running around in terms of people that are strapping on, 25s and 35-pound plates and getting sets of 5. But
well, those are the hockey girls. But what about the high school females? Is really and you still had this. These were your high school female. You said high school female.
Right. And that's what I looked at. So with someone like I said, like Mia, who again on the freak side of things, she can do 12, and she's really
12 chin-ups?
Yeah.
Jesus.
I've got a couple of really high-end females, but when we get that average girl to get the first chin up in high school is a big deal.
Very cool. Yeah. What sport does Mia play?
Ice hockey.
She does. Okay, that's right. I saw. What am I thinking? I did see pictures of her. Is she doing pretty well?
She's doing really well. Yeah. I think at some point before, she's only in 9th grade, but to me, she's a kid that more than likely is going to be a full scholarship college player.
Yeah.
She's very.
Yeah. Wow. Coach, we'll let you go on that. Thank you for doing this, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for having me as usual.
All right, right now at Perform Better, they got the huge holiday sale up to 30% off. So many items, free shipping on select items as well. Right now on sale, you got sandbags, FMS kits, TRX, all kinds of rollers, kettlebells, dumbbells, so many things. Check it out. That's the huge holiday sale. Also, all the one-day seminars, the presenters, the dates were announced. They're starting off January 11th in Fair Lawn, New Jersey, and they're up to San Fran, LA, Austin, Orlando, Boston, Chicago, Delaware. It's crazy. Check that out at performbetter.com.
Hey, this is Adam.
This is Tim.
Welcome to the TrainHeroic Data-Driven Coaching segment.
Go.
Last time we talked training volume, and one thing that came up was training to failure.
Mm-hmm.
Just basically because over the years, that's one variable that's been held constant a lot of time.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And so, training to failure can work, right? Obviously, you train hard and you can get results,
Sure.
right? But you always have to question the assumption of is that actually the best way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're kind of historically tied to training to failure, right? Like a lot of our practice and things we put into play in fitness and strength and conditioning today, this is kind of a post-World War II development. And then through the 60s and 70s with, the bodybuilding craze, we were watching all these big bodybuilders push themselves to failure. And Arnold has the famous quote, right? The last 3 to 4 reps is where the muscles grow. And that's what separates the common folk like Adam and I from the greats like Arnold himself. So, there's definitely a physiological, physiological side to this, but also, a mental side to it as well. And it's kind of ingrained into our culture.
Sure.
So we're not here to tell you to train to failure or not to, but we're going to kind of lay it out there for you.
Yeah. As Tim said, partially it's the types of people who are going to succeed in these types of things often want to work really hard. And yes, you have to work really hard to get better. But okay, so first of all, the idea of training to failure, right, is kind of an arbitrary one. I think, right?
Okay.
It is a definable thing, but it's really a very specific thing, which is it's task failure. It literally means I momentarily couldn't do that thing anymore.
Yeah.
The exact thing, right?
Yeah.
And that's why you can say, well, I could do drop sets, or I could do forced negatives or whatever.
There's other things you can do, right, to drive that adaptation.
So my point is, you could always do more work.
Sure.
Right? It's not like, I did 10 and I can't do that. I need to now I have to rest for 3 minutes before I go again. Right? That's not how it has to work, right?
Right.
Okay. So given that now, let's also say the size principle, right? So last time we talked a little bit about that, but the idea is that as you go through a set and you fatigue, you recruit more and more motor units, and at the end you can bring in those higher threshold ones, right? So essentially the idea would be, you probably have to get to failure or close to,
correct,
to activate all those motor units, right?
See Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Right. Okay, but what if that's not true, right?
Yeah.
What if? So let's ask that question, right? So there is research showing that happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it is in single joint exercises, right?
Okay.
Again, they're easy to study, right? They're easy to have untrained people do partially.
Yep.
You can strap them into a machine and they can just go ham.
Curl away.
Right? But there's 1 or 2 studies out now, and then again, this is early stuff, but showing, for example, in a squat, that the quad activation doesn't depend as much on the weight on the bar as it does on how fast you're trying to move the bar.
Right, and you're giving a little preview into what we'll dive into in the future here, a little velocity type stuff. But keep going, Adam. I mean, that's really good stuff. So you don't need to go to failure is what you're saying.
Right, so I mean, if you take even a moderately heavy load and you just pump that thing, right? You're going to get pretty good quad activation from the start, right? So maybe even that assumption isn't totally true.
Okay.
Right? Okay, so now we're asked the question, so is training to failure a problem? Right? We've seen in studies it can work. That's one good thing. We have lots of studies showing that people, at least in the short term, train really hard and they can grow and get stronger, right? So, but does it cause any issues?
I mean, that's a tough question. And I think it really depends on the context in which you're training. You know what I'm saying? If you're training in an athletically driven culture like football players, rugby players, things of that nature, and they have a ton of things going on, right? You got to be cognizant of that. If you're training in the private sector and you've got clients and you're pushing them till they, their quads explode every time they're training, might not be the best way to go about things.
I mean, so going back to the bodybuilding example, right?
Yeah.
The traditional, kind of 1 time a week split for body parts, right? Or muscle groups. You can get away with a lot when you have that long to recover. They can just do an amazing amount of volume. They can probably train a lot to failure, and they probably can get away with that.
It makes sense.
Right? But it's been studied at this point, and at 24 or 48 hours, like even if you do the same amount of work, right. Volume match and all that, the group training to failure, there's a recovery isn't as good.
Right.
And so if you have to do something else, like say a football player, right? So you have to go to practice the next day or something, or play or something like that.
Or even later that day.
Yeah, right. Out loud. Exactly. That may not be the best option.
No, it may not. And to Adam's point, there's other ways to get that adaptation, right? You don't have to push your folks to failure every single time. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah. And I'm not saying it's like not probably an either or proposition, right? Meaning as we alluded to, maybe it's different between compound and single joint movements, right?
Totally.
It's a lot easier to, to trick. You can do sets of curls to failure. But if you're an athlete, maybe you aren't doing that. If you're a bodybuilder, maybe you are.
Right. And there's ways to build toughness that don't require you to do squats till failure. Mental toughness in that regard.
That's going to do it for us today. Go to TrainHeroic.com to start your 14-day free trial. When you're talking to one of our representatives, tell them the Strength Coach podcast sent you for 10% off the year of the Pro or Elite Edition.
All right, now time for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. I'm here with Rachel Cosgrove. Rachel, thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me, Anthony.
All right. Well, one of the things that came up on the StrengthCoach.com forum was about one of our buddies, Brian Sippets. He wants to offer his employees health insurance and a 401k maybe, and like a health savings account. We're seeing more and more people do this just to say, look, this industry, there's a lot of turnover in this industry. I think it's almost like 40% a year new people come in. We see a lot of turnover. And part of the reason is because people start to realize, I love doing this, but I can't afford to do it. And so one of the ways as an employer to attract good trainers and to keep people for a good amount of time, because you've invested a lot of time in their education, et cetera, is to maybe offer health insurance. So I wanted to get your take on this, what you guys are doing. I know this is so different from state to state and there's different plans, but at least we'll get an idea about what you guys do at Results Fitness and how you take care of your staff.
Yeah, absolutely. And this has been a part of our vision since we opened 20 years ago, Alan and I. It was like we wanted to create a place for trainers to work where it was a career and where it was, they felt like they were building a long-term, way to take care of themselves, not just I'll do this in the short term till I figure out what I'm actually going to do for my real job, right? So, and I think a part of, it really being seen seriously and taken seriously as a profession is that those of us who do own businesses and who are employers, we do have to figure out a way to offer our employees the things that they would get at a quote unquote real job, And so, and I think, because there's always, our mission is to change the way fitness is done. And that was not just for our clients, but also for trainers, and to really, create an atmosphere where our trainers could work and feel like, wow, I have a real job doing what I love. So that, from the beginning, we, as soon as we could, set up health insurance. And I think the easiest is to set it up for yourself, get a broker, and you can actually do it through some of the payroll companies too. If you're using someone like ADP, they all have companies that they work with to get health insurance and things like that. So that might be an avenue to look into, but definitely looking into, what would it take to offer my employees health insurance? And you can do, 50%. You might not be able to pay 100%, but, even if you're offering, that you can cover part of it and then the other, 50% comes out of their paycheck, it's usually a better plan than they can get on their own. Yeah. And you're helping them, right? It's like, now they're going to be a part of your company. They know you care about them, and they're a part of, you're helping them with the bigger picture of their life, and being a part of your team. And so I definitely think it builds that loyalty with your team. It also shows them that you take their profession and their career seriously, and that, this isn't, you are ready to invest in them. We also offer a 401k. And again, easiest is get it set up for yourself. And then as you add employees, you can add them to the plan, and look at your budget and see what you can afford. But, with those 401k plans, retirement plans, there is, like a minimum percentage that as an employer you'll put into it. And I always, it's basically what's probably going to happen is, how I see it is you're going to be able to, you might end up paying a little less per hour, and putting that money into their retirement, showing them that, hey, they're getting a raise over here by you investing into, like your new employee, especially a new employee that you're just hiring, and explaining, hey, we have a 401k plan. So, here's where we start you as far as our hourly rate.
Yeah.
But we want you to keep in mind that we're going to be contributing to your 401k plan. So, you're also getting this extra money every month that's going to be going towards your future and towards, your retirement. So it's, you're basically putting money that you would be putting towards their payroll, which then you'd have to pay payroll taxes on. Instead, you're helping them cover some expenses or helping them build a future. And so it kind of creates a better package, for somebody who they may end up taking a job with you, even though maybe it's paying a little less than someplace else, because you have the whole picture, and you're, you have a real, career and a position that's, not just a part-time, we don't really care about your future or about, if you're going to be okay for the long term. So I think it's important. I think it does. I think for, if you want to show your employees that you take it seriously.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, I do like that. Like as an industry and as a business owner, I think we should have a responsibility. We want to elevate this industry. You want people to stay in it as well. And, you want good people to stay in it. And I think it's a great way to do that. Rach, you also have a little wiggle room here. Like you could say, like, look, we're offering 50% insurance from, in your first year. And then, it could be, hey, as a raise almost, we're offering 75% in your second year. And then once you get over that, we're going to do 100%, so it gives people a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. It's like room for growth. As well. How do you start them out? Do you start them out full or 50 or what do you do?
So in California, and again, you have to check the laws in all your states. You have to do the same for all of your employees. So we used to, all of our full-time and managers, we used to actually pay 100% for. So now, because we have to do you have to give your entire company the same. So it's 50% across the board. So it's just, looking for, and then, so for some of them, we also, with our broker, we were able to offer them different plans. So not all of them have to do the same plan. So if some of them, since they are going to be paying 50%, some of them might choose a cheaper plan, like the PPO plan, that they'll end up putting more out of pocket if they have something happen, where others who may have pre-existing conditions, they might go with something more like an HMO plan where they're going to, end up not having to pay as much out of pocket, but they might pay more upfront. So they can make a decision, their own decision. So for us, currently, as of right now, across the board for our whole team, it's 50%. And it's, I think, there's like, definitely if you can offer that 100%, it's a nice thing to do. I think there is also something to them investing in their own health insurance too. So then they know that, because sometimes they forget about it. When we did have the 100%, they don't even like realize the like that we're paying it, right? Because they just kind of take it for granted. And so there is that piece too. So it is actually, there's a good part of it of having them contribute something to it, because then they, they feel like, okay, maybe I'll go get my checkup once a year and maybe I'll take care of myself. The other thing to think about as an employer is making sure they have a health insurance plan that if they do get sick, you want them to go get well, So I like when we didn't offer it, and someone would get sick and I would be like, go to the doctor, like go, go get yourself well so you can come back to work. And so whether they need to go, take care of themselves. So it's just another way for them to take care of themselves so that they can contribute more to your company and what you do.
Absolutely. Good stuff. Love it. Thank you for talking about that, because I know it's, it was one of those topics where people get a little, kind of, they freak out over it. Like, how am I going to afford this? But like you said, if you're paying that money towards an hourly rate, you're still getting taxed on that. So this is, kind of, if you look at the numbers, it's something that you can figure out.
Piece of your, and talk to your employees. Like, is it something that's important for the team that you want, that you're attracting? Are they an older demographic, a younger demographic? Do they care? If they're already all, are they all married and on their spouse's plan? And it doesn't matter, So you do want to talk to your employees too and figure out, is it something that matters to them? Because that's going to make a difference too. It's definitely gotten much harder over the last, 5 to 6 years. Every year, health insurance has gone up. and what you get for your health insurance is less.
Yeah.
So as an employer, every year when I sit down with our broker recently over the last, 5 or 6 years, it's like, okay, all your employees are going to get less coverage and you're going to be paying more. Like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh. So, and that's obviously, changes in our health insurance system and, things we're currently dealing with, but that's, something that can change, so something to keep in mind. And that's part of why we've gone to 50% too, is because it just kept increasing. But
Yeah.
basically, I think you can find something that you can offer to your team. And the nice thing is, if you do a group insurance, like, it just gives them the opportunity to, have health insurance at a rate that's probably going to be cheaper than on their own. And, for anybody that does have a pre-existing condition, it can be really hard for them to get insurance. So they have to take your entire team as part of your group plan.
Nice.
So
Okay,
that'd be a
good.
good thing. Yeah.
Cool. All right, Rachel, thanks for doing this, and we'll talk to you next time.
Sure, absolutely. And by the way, we have our next mentorship coming up. If anyone wants to come out and spend some time with us for a couple days, we're actually do 3-day mentorship in February. So head over to resultsfitnessmentorship.com and fill out an application, and we hope to see you there.
All right, now it's time for the Body by Boyle online.com. Hit the gym with the Strength Coach segment. Become an insider to Mike Boyle's strength and conditioning with staff meetings, in-services, and complete access to the MBSC programs. Check it out at bodybyboyleonline.com. Today I have on Dr. Andy Galpin. He is a tenured professor at the Center for Sports Performance at CSU Fullerton. He has an exercise science degree. His master's is in human movement sciences, and he has a PhD in human bioenergetics. He's not just a professor, though. He's a pretty accomplished athlete in football, weightlifting, MMA, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So lots of great practical information. He has great, unbelievable educational resources that you can access. And we're going to have links for that on a YouTube channel. And he goes over these different topics in either 5, 25-minute or 55-minute increments. Very cool. So you can decide how deep you want to get with that. He's also a co-author of the book Unplugged that he did with Phil White and Brian McKenzie. So, Andy, thanks for coming on today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, man. You guys have done so much great work in the field over a long number of years. So it's an honor to be on your show.
Yeah, thanks, man. And I love what you're doing I love your mission to provide all of this education, the way you're going about doing it. Obviously, you're a professor and like teaching people, breaking things down. I watched a couple videos this morning, and I can tell everybody that Andy has a great way of making things simple. Certainly, concepts that can be tough. Certainly for me, and that people can he really breaks it down in a digestible way. And I just want to go over the mission. I want to say this, right? Tell everybody, but provide the world with free and accessible, high quality, accurate, and entertaining information that will inspire and improve the human condition by enhancing the understanding of human performance, nutrition, health, and well-being. And I just love this idea about entertaining, because the videos are entertaining and he makes it really easy. And the fact that they're free on YouTube, he has a Patreon account that you can donate to and access. So very cool. Love what you're doing, Andy. So thanks again.
I appreciate it, man. It's a big passion and been a major focus of my life for a long time. So it's always nice to hear people appreciate it.
Love it. Well, I saw that you were in your bio that you run something called the BMEP Lab, and it said, which studies the acute responses and chronic adaptations of human skeletal muscle in response to high force, velocity, power, and fatiguing exercise from the whole body down to the individual muscle fiber and even into the individual DNA. The team does this by taking muscle biopsies from non-athletes and elite athletes. You got to tell us what you're doing here. This sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, that is exactly kind of what we do. So I'll back up a little bit. My day job is a bit weird, where I'm a full-time professor. This is my real life job, and I'm also the director for a Center for Sport Performance. So within that center, we've got a whole host of faculty and laboratories that all study on, performing and disseminating research that improves human performance. And so what this means is this could cover everything from your classic exercise physiology to what we would call our standard strength and conditioning stuff. So this could be force plates, vertical jump, strength, power. We have sports psychologists who are fantastic. We have biomechanists who do, kinetics and kinematics and all these things. And then within that, my muscle physiology lab is there. So we really, within the center and then within my research line specifically, it's really anything that we can do to help understand human performance. And so I'll come back to the single fiber lab in a second, but just to lay the picture of what I do fully for anyone who's not heard of any of my stuff. So that's kind of the way I think about it as a third of my job. The other third of it is, of course, teaching. And so I teach at the senior and graduate level program design, strength and conditioning principles, sports nutrition, things like that. And then, of course, that all falls into the YouTube page. So what I try to do is basically take all of my university lectures, any conference presentations, anything I can do, and put those up on YouTube, all for free. So basically anyone could theoretically take all of my classes. And there's no newspaper or newsletter to sign up for. There's no back-end DVDs. It's just all up there for free. And so the other third of my life is working with professional athletes. So at this time, I run really a large gamut of what I do with professional athletes. So sometimes they're coming into my lab and I'm actually training them, I'm coaching them, like I'm their full-time strength conditioning coach. Some of them it's nutrition online. Some of them it's building out their camp or their quad, their 4-year program for the Olympics. It could be a range. And so these athletes are Major League Baseball players, elite boxers, top-ranked UFC fighters, weightlifters, powerlifters. I mean, sort of you name it. So I'm kind of in that unique position where I'm not a full-time scientist. I'm not a full-time strength coach. I'm not an entrepreneur. Like I'm not an online salesperson or anything. I don't have anything against any of those professions, but that's just what I do. So I mean, we'll certainly come back to any of that if you like. But having said that, within my muscle fiber lab, what we do is I've always been particularly interested in muscle, and so we'll take muscle biopsies when it's appropriate and try to address or answer questions about what makes muscle grow, shrink, die, repair. Why some individuals can say respond to more volume, some individuals respond better to less volume. We've done things with taper, so those that need more taper, those that perform better with less taper, why that happens. And one thing that we're overarchingly particularly interested in is the precision aspect of performance. So that is individualized prescriptions, individualized understanding of why someone's muscle works differently than another person's, and how we can translate that into programming and nutrition or training sort of thing. So in order to understand really what's happening in muscle, you have to examine muscle. So we'll take the biopsies, we'll isolate all of the muscle cells that we're interested in one by one, and then we'll run a whole gamut of testing things that could be from the anabolic signaling cascade to individual contractile properties of the fibers or what they have at the genetic level. It really just depends on the question. So we're just trying to understand performance. And the last piece I'll say on this is where we differ is we don't study disease. We don't study anti-disease. We don't study aging or anti-obesity. Our stuff is all about the other end of the spectrum. So what are the elites doing that the other ones aren't? How can we get there? It's maximizing performance. It's understanding the positive things. It's not, we almost never venture into the disease prevention, treatment, or management. So that's a big picture answer of kind of what I do.
Very cool. And so how long have you been doing that piece of it? How long have you been involved with that?
I got to Fullerton in 2011, and that's always been a part of my research here. But of course, I've been doing that type of research for almost 20 years now, as starting as a master's student, certainly through my PhD and then here. So 18, 19 years, something like that.
Wow. Have you found like really, almost like the myth busters? Have you busted a lot of myths?
Oh, yeah.
Like ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, geez, like it would run the whole program to go through all of them. I mean, we've done wild stuff like, the taper is a good example. One that one of the taper studies we did, we've done stuff with 80-year-old professional athletes who were Olympic and world champions in the 1940s and 50s, and they haven't stopped competing in their 90s. They still race every year, things like that. We biopsy those folks. We've in good part rewrote what people understand about muscle fiber types. So fast twitch versus slow twitch, things like that. So, we've done a lot that I think has changed how people view the twin study. We did a pretty famous at this point study on monozygous twins. So these are twins with the exact same DNA, and looked at, but the difference was they had about 35 years of different exercise habits. And so we were able to really challenge and show quite clearly at this point, like how much of your performance is based on genetics and how much is based on your training. So there's just a whole bunch of areas we could go into.
Very cool.
That we've uncovered the last 20 years.
Awesome. So let's go into one of your videos was, how heavy should we lift to maximize power? And it's been a question. That's why I picked the videos, because it's been something that, we've been talking about on the podcast, talks about strengthcoach.com. I see it on Twitter, et cetera. And it's one of those questions that I think, because we're going to start to involve some percentages, people get a little bit, there could be some misconceptions. Can you kind of just give us an overview, and then I have some specific questions?
Sure. I got, I've always been interested in this question. I remember as a master's student being told, okay, peak power happens at 30% of your 1 rep max or whatever. And just immediately going like, what? There's no way. And I just started thinking, well, surely the same can't be, the peak power can't be achieved in a medicine ball throw than a back squat versus an RDL versus a bent row. Like these all can't have the same. And I'm not a biomechanist. Math kills me. And so force velocity, I was just like, what? Like, I just knew practically from my experience and my intuition, it's just like, this doesn't make sense. And so as a master's student, I dove into the literature really well in lit review. And I was just like, this is not like this 30% number is total horseshit. This is not, I don't see this at all supported in the research. In fact, there's a lot of research goes directly against this. And my practical experience isn't matching up with that either. So what's going on here? And so it didn't take too long, but to dive back and figure out, like, where did this number come from? And you really realize the classic A.B. Hill articles and stuff are going to show this 30%, but you're like, oh, that's an isolated frog muscle that's being tied up to a force transducer, in a laboratory. It's not even in like a whole muscle contraction. And so I'm like, well, like theoretically, and then you start to learn about like what some people may or not have heard of, like length tension relationship. And that's the same thing, like that's being bastardized. That is not at all what the length tension relationship is being taught in classes. Not even close to what it actually is. It's not even close to what the original research said it was. That's just been totally manipulated over time. And so I continually had to answer these questions in class and stuff. And I'm like, you know what? I mentioned I'm just going to make a video. I'm going to go kind of right into it and show you exactly what I'm talking about with a cursory gloss over the science and literature, just to kind of show people. But I think that's the problem that I wanted to address is, okay, how heavy do we train if we're trying to maximize power? Because I would hear people be incredibly dogmatic about one end of the force velocity curve or another end, or some spot in the middle. I'm just like, this is not really an actual answer to the question. So that's kind of why I made the video.
Yeah. And it doesn't, it never made sense. Part of that piece never made sense to me as well, because like you said, you have these different ideas with, what am I going to do? Throw, 50% of my max med ball weight. I never really understood all that piece.
No.
And also there's people that are stronger, that are going to, that's going to be, and you said, there's the three main factors where the stronger you are, the bigger muscle groups used, and then are they more dynamic movements? Those are all going to be factors in, and that percentage can be anywhere from 30 to 75%, right?
It can even be higher. So for example, if you look at somebody trained in weightlifting, so you may be more familiar with that term as like Olympic weightlifting. Mm-hmm. Right, but the proper term is weightlifting. Somebody who's trained in that, they typically won't hit peak power up to 90, 95%, depending on the movement. So for a snatch versus a clean, that's even higher. So sometimes those folks hit peak power 95%. So like the range that peak power can probably pretty rarely going to be below 30%. because based on the force velocity curve, which we can cover, this is mass is very, very low at that point. But some folks can move a very high percentage of their mass in certain movements incredibly fast. And so really, my opinion, the global answer is, well, peak power is probably going to happen somewhere between 30 and 95%. But I think for most people, you're probably fair saying somewhere between 30 and 80%, something like that, 85%. I mean, there's no magic cutoff. And if we look back of why this happens, is because of our interaction with force and velocity, right? So we know the power is a product of those two factors, right? How much force you can create and how much velocity you can move with. Well, some folks are better at one or the other end of those spectrums. And so in order for them to train power, they have to address where their shortcoming is. And so I can show you or go over examples if you want of how we identify how a person's there. But
great. Yeah.
But just to kind of figure here is one of the things we figure out, like once we figure out someone is, say, deficient in the velocity side of the spectrum, well, putting this person's peak power training at 85% of the 1 rep max is probably not going to help them much because they're already very good at that mass or that force side of the spectrum. They struggle with the peak velocity. And so in this particular case, the way that I teach my students is power training is actually a product of 3 different things. You could do absolute speed work, right? This is very, very light, very few repetitions, very low fatigue. And if that is a reason why your power is lacking, that will have a huge effect on your total power production. You don't ever have to do anything above 10% of your 1 rep max, and that could really help your power, even though that training itself isn't powerful. If that contributes to a great increase in your speed, then you will be able to improve your power. The same thing could be in the opposite of the spectrum. So someone who is fast but relatively weak, well, just purely doing heavy maximal or close to maximal strength stuff, even if those movements themselves are not fast, can contribute greatly to their power production. Or somebody who's in the middle, who's a little bit of both, they may need to actually train more in that quote unquote power range, 40 to 70%, to actually improve power. And so we have to have a little bit more intelligence when we're prescribing things and understanding, instead of saying like, well, this is what we do, right? You're hungry, therefore you eat this. Like, no, why are you hungry? Who are you? Like, what are you doing, right? You need to be more power. That doesn't mean we train power. The way that I approach this field is I identify the problem and then I search for the defender. I don't just apply a solution. And so my question, if somebody came to me and said, I need to get more powerful, like there would be not only objective, but subjective questions about, well, like, why are you not powerful right now? And we're going to try to identify why they're lacking power, and then we're going to deploy the solution for that defender and not just simply have the exact same prescription for the exact same problem, because people's reason for the problem is different.
Yeah.
So having a number to me is stupid.
So how do we identify it without, taking muscle fiber out of it?
Yeah, you wouldn't need to take a biopsy. This depends on the athlete, depends on the sport. We're talking a 13-year-old, we're talking a 23-year-old professional hockey player, we're talking a 29-year-old MMA fighter on her second career. So it depends. I think within your sport, you need to develop or look at other people who have developed fairly standardized testing. So I'll just give you an example from my sport. But again, please understand, depending on the sport you work with, you're probably almost surely going to have to do this differently. Mm-hmm. All right, because the actual power demands within each sport are different. For example, I got a Major League Baseball player. For him to be powerful, he only has to swing a 30 to 40 ounce item. He'll never have to produce power that's being expressed over more force than that 40 ounce baseball bat. So his sport is on a very different part of the force velocity curve than my weightlifter, who's like an Olympic weightlifter, like literally an Olympian, right? So within that individual sport, when they say powerful for them, that means actually 2 very different things, like incredibly different. The baseball player is more expressed over that very velocity-based end of the spectrum, right? When he says any more power, that means in his mind and his coach's mind, that means he needs to hit more home runs. Okay, great. Her mind, it needs my 1 rep max, my snatch needs to go up. Like that's entirely different definitions of power.
Yeah.
An NFL player means he needs to hit guys harder on the field. again, very, very different expressions of power. So first step would be identifying, well, what end of the power spectrum are we trying to optimize for? Because it's not all just 50%, right? They're not all trying to have that. Their version of power is a little bit different. So that's my first step in the analysis. And then we'll just take the baseball player as an example, and I'll compare that to, say, an MMA fighter. Well, the baseball player I know is going to be hedged really towards that velocity end of the spectrum, even for power. And so then we may do something like look at their power numbers, right? What are the metrics in baseball? In baseball, we collect a ton of metrics on velocity of the ball coming off the bat, what's your actual number of home runs per bat, like things like this. And then I would have a conversation with that individual, their previous strength coach, their hitting coach, and just try to identify, like, is it a movement issue? So maybe their technique is bad. They're not connecting their hips to their feet. Like, what happens? Is it an injury? Like, every time I do this, my groin has been really tight, and so I've been actually hesitant. And so what you might actually find is, like, you don't have a lack of power. You actually have a movement quality issue. So there's no point of worrying about force velocity curve. You just need to fix your hip dysplasia that's causing all you to pull your groin over 5 weeks, right? Whatever the hell the case might be. Mm-hmm. So I'm really honestly taking a big picture step of, like, why are you not producing the power? It's not just like, oh, you come to me from power, here's the program. These are all a big part, and this is actually a bigger part of my analysis than anything else. I mean, eventually we will dive down and do something like, let's have you do a vertical jump on a force plate, or we'll have you do maybe a force velocity curve. So we'll have you do deadlifts starting at 10% of your 1 rep max with a trap bar, and we'll put a force velocity transducer on the bar and see what your power output is, and we'll go up and we'll have you do one at 10%, 20%, 30%, 50%, and we'll see when you start to peak out. Those would all be options, totally depending on the athlete, depending on the need. In baseball, those would be some pretty standard metrics for them. I'm probably not putting them Major League Baseball player and having them do a 1 rep max clean or hang snatch or power snatch as a metric for power. Like, it's, unless they love doing that, most don't. So, like, there's just no point because they're going to suck at it. Like, okay, they're out. They're on for that. Contrast that with, say, a UFC fighter. We'll actually probably do similar overarching analysis. But then it will be things like I'll watch their fights, of course, and see, like, when did they exert power and it didn't succeed. I have a punching bag that they can actually punch and kick and knee and elbow, and it actually measures impact force within that. So we'll do that. We'll have them do that on the force plate so we can measure things there. And then we'll have them do a similar, it's kind of like a landmine, exercise. Mm-hmm. And we'll have them do basically kind of like an upward punch with that landmine attached to a force velocity transducer. And we'll do the same thing kind of like in a squat mac. We'll do an isometric mid-thigh pull, and we can do these things. If you don't have a force plate, it's no problem. Most people can get a GymAware or force velocity transducers for $200. It's not incredibly expensive, and those things tell us a bunch. So we also have some medicine balls that have little velocity transducers in them.
Oh, okay.
So they can throw those things. We can get the numbers directly out the medicine balls. And again, those are not incredibly expensive. These are not like our force plate, for example, is like $40,000.
Yeah.
But you could get some of these things for $500, which is super reasonable for a full-time coach, right? Or $1,000 or something. Mm-hmm. So we have a little bit of both. I guess the reason I'm saying that is we certainly do have a lot of these metrics that are like research grade only, but then we use a lot that are definitely within a practitioner's range of theirs. So it's kind of a long answer, I know, but that's my most honest answer of when we're trying to assess power specifically. That's what I'm doing, and it's that comprehensive. Another one that I'll give you, which is actually really short, but I think very helpful, is we'll do a very basic jumping profile, right? If it makes sense, depending on the sport, which most does. And this is everything from, we'll have them do a counter movement jump, just see how high you can touch. We'll have you do a static jump, and then we'll have you do a step off of a 12 to 16 inch box jump and land and re-jump, of course, not a like box squat. And then we're going to look at the differences in performance between those three metrics. And that tells us a lot about how you produce force and power. So as a quick example, if you do a counter movement jump, this is when you dip into it and jump as high as you can, and you jump 20 inches in the air. And then I have you put your hands on your hips, go down to quarter squat position, half squat position, hold for 3 seconds, then jump as high as you can without kind of re-dipping and bounding, and you jump 19 inches. That's a huge problem, because the difference between those performances when you get a big rebound and a big dip and drive should be a lot higher than an inch.
Yeah.
So that tells me, like, you actually, is it a force production issue from the muscle, or is it a rebound elasticity issue? Same thing when you step off, or you get sometimes with the basketball players, we'll give them a 2-step lead in jump. Right? You should be able to, with the running start, jump higher than with standing. And so all those things are going to tell us a lot about how you express your force into power, and whether you're generating from muscle or elasticity. And you can look up those ratios, numbers, like how high it should be, but typically 80% is a good mark. So if you're higher than lower than that, that tells us a lot of information about where to hedge towards.
Excellent. Let's talk about the kind of getting into when people are going to do it, are going to start to train some power, and you figured out what your weights are. You had some guidelines that was pretty. We've heard before 3 to 20 sets, depending on how many reps you do, but it was 1 to 5 sets, reps per set. So that was, I think a lot of people listening kind of understand that, and we've been kind of preaching that for a while. But one thing I wanted to kind of make sure everybody talked about, or you talked about, was has to be max speed. Like, and I've been trying to with my kids, just like, instead of just throwing the ball, guys, break the ball, go through the wall, always throwing those balls as hard as they can. But one thing I was always confused about is the rest there. When we're doing some of this training, could you go over maybe some of the different implements if we're doing, speed squats, or if we're doing some medicine ball throws or plyometric? What should the rest be between those sets?
So the easiest way, honestly, to think about it is you have to look at what you're trying to accomplish. So in this case, if you're trying to move the ball at maximum velocity, and you can't move it at maximum or very close to maximum velocity, then are you training your ability to move maximum velocity? No, you're not. So the rest should be whatever it needs to be to make sure that you're ensuring that you're at, I'll typically say like 90% or more, right? Because you're never going to be at max velocity that long. Like, is it feeling like it's 95%, 95% or higher? If it's not, then rest more. If you're resting more and it's still not there, then you're done. That's it. Like, what are we doing it for? Folks tend to conflate that with maintaining speed over time. And that's also important, or power in this case, but those are different issues. So we hear commonly people say things like, well, we train these to fatigue, or we use short rest intervals, or we do these after conditioning because in a game, we have to be able to be powerful in the fourth quarter. Like, sure. What you're training there is your ability to sustain your current power output over time. That's not actually enhancing your maximal power output. Both of them are important, but these are different things. So what the hell are you training for? If you're training for maximizing your power, this is achieving a new threshold, hitting numbers you've never hit before. This simply cannot happen in the presence of fatigue. So, we say things like 2 to 5 minutes of rest between sets for power, but that totally depends on what you're doing. If you're doing like one medicine ball toss with an 8-pound medicine ball, you certainly don't need to wait 5 minutes to throw it again.
Yeah.
So how fit are you? Incredibly fit people tend to not need as much rest. Those that are less trained, or less trained in that movement, or had a harder day the day before, they may need a little bit more rest. So my metric is, I actually, this is where I like velocity-based training or outcome-based. So for example, instead of throwing a ball and just hitting the wall, can you back them up to a distance in which if they did drop more than 10%, the ball wouldn't touch the wall? And now, like, the power output is it's easy. Like, hey, the first rep you hit the ball from 10 meters away, or you hit the wall, and now you're not hitting the wall anymore. And as opposed to just like smashing the wall and like smash it harder. Well, it's hard for them to kind of like see that and feel that. Or are you throwing it to a partner? Like, you've got to get it to you're not getting it there anymore. This is up in the air. You're like, are you hitting this metric? Vertical jump is great because it's like you put a mark on the wall. Like, did you touch that? Yes or no? Like, you didn't touch it. Yeah. You have to touch it every time. Whatever the thing can be that's within your space that you work with. These things are nice because then it's like, hey, you're going to hit that mark 30 times today. I think I want you to do something like 10 sets of 3, but I don't really care what happens. I want you to hit it 30 times, and you're going to take whatever. And if you jump and you don't get it, you're going to take a break. And if you don't get it the second time, we're going to take a longer break. If you don't hit it the third time, we're going to take a really long break. If you don't hit it the fourth time, then I think we're done today, or whatever else. We're going to have to lower the mark, or whatever your coaching decision happens to be. It could be a number of things, but the point is, again, you that's your metric, your standardization for quality control, and so the rest then should reflect that. If again the goal is truly maximizing peak power versus sustaining current levels of power over a long period of time, those are different things, though.
Absolutely. Just really quick, can we, there's been a lot to, hey, look, you can't train both of those qualities in the same, I don't know if it's the same phase, or people have talked about, at least just don't train them on the same day. Can we train for max power on one day and then that kind of power endurance, I guess, on another day? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's too context dependent. So of course you can. And of course, you could give me an example when it's a terrible idea.
Yeah.
So that, like I don't really see futility in making statements like that's a good idea or bad idea without having a tremendous amount of context. Again, I'll tell you from my experience only, because this is sports I work with. And with a professional MMA fighter, you 1,000% can train both qualities in the same day. 1,000%, because their fitness is so unbelievable. People that don't work in the sport like this, they don't really understand. They say they do, but I promise you, they really don't.
Yeah.
Because if you're used to say, I might play college football, and I thought I understood these things, and I really, really don't. Football players are not incredibly fit. They're incredibly powerful, incredibly things, but they're not super fit. My MMA fighters at the professional level, they're going to very routinely train 16 to 20 times per week, which is absurd. I would prefer them to train far less. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And I have taken them from, for example, I have one girl, top ranked UFC fighter, and her force plate data on all these things were, we'll say very, 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 very poor, according to the UFC's standards and their metrics. And she is now the very top in her division. Training all these qualities, her fitness has gone up, her VO2 max has gone up, all these things have gone up, and she is now simultaneously one of the top in her division in ability to produce force and power and express that into the ground and into an implement. And it didn't take that long to do that. And this is again with her training 16 to 20 times per week. Ideal? Not even close to what I'm saying. But I'm saying, like, these things are very possible. I think the CrossFit community has shown us a lot, and that as much as I don't agree with many of the things that they have done, many or do, but they have exposed that little bit of weakness. And it's like, okay, if you become really fit, and by fit I don't mean higher VO2 max or higher 2-hour marathon time. What I mean is like your ability to repeat training sessions multiple times a day. People are often shocked with what professional weightlifters will accomplish, right? It's like, well, you should only squat 2-3 times a week. They're squatting 12 to 13, 14 times a week, and they continue to get more powerful. Their 1-hour maxes go up. And so I think it would be, again, a little bit underserved for us to just make statements like you can't train both those qualities at once.
Yeah.
In a high school kid, probably we don't need to do that. In season, Major League Baseball, okay, the professional pitchers throwing every 5 days, probably not go after both those things the same day. But man, it depends on the sport. You could get after both those things certainly the same day, as long as you do the order appropriately. And if the rest of the stress and stimuli and recovery are appropriate, that's certainly possible.
Okay, great. Andy, what about let's stay on this idea about throwing some medicine balls around, because I think, a lot of our listeners are doing that. And the question has become about what weight, because, you're not getting a 1-rep max with a medicine ball throw. So where are you getting this idea about, okay, besides, for those of us that don't have, the accelerometer inside the medicine ball, how are we determining what, is it just the same idea, like you said, move back 10%, or, how do we figure that out?
Can you rephrase the question? I'm not sure I tracked that exactly.
So I don't understand how we can relate picking a med ball weight to the same idea as picking like a speed squat weight, you know?
I see. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I don't think I have a good answer for you. I
What do you
really don't.
use?
For that.
What do you do?
So it depends on the athlete, what we're looking for. We used some medicine balls yesterday with one of my UFC fighters. She's top ranked, number 2, I think, right now, undefeated in her division. She's incredibly talented. So we actually used a little bit of complex training with her. We paired some front squats with some very heavy medicine ball throws. In this case, it was, I think, 25 pounds, considering that she's 120 pounds. This is a pretty good percentage of her body weight. But she will just bury that 25-pound ball off the wall, just smash the wall and move it over. So it's no problem there. So I don't really worry about the exact percentage of the ball. If they're coaching, if it's an athlete in front of me, it's 100% coming down to my eye. Am I trying to train more towards the speed end of the spectrum? Am I trying to train more towards the force end of the spectrum? And then are they moving in the way I think they should move? Now that explanation, I realize, gives none of your listeners any help because they're like, great. I don't know what your eye means, but that's all I'm looking for. Like if I know the athlete, how they move, and if I'm trying to get them to move fast and it's not moving fast, I'll take the weight off a little bit. If I want like more of a little bit of fast with a lot of force impact, we'll put more on. So that's the way I'll do it. And I'll just sort of scale it up. The other thing I will look for primarily with the medicine ball are, in this particular case, rather than the weight being the thing that I'm concerned about, it is the quality of the movement. So typically when you do like traditional barbell stuff, you're in sagittal plane, right? You're in one kind of thing, and I'm looking for movement technique. But with the medicine ball, obviously, a lot of the times we're doing rotation or multi-step movements, right? So it might be a jump to a throw, it might be a couple of steps, a twist and a throw, kind of depending on what sport they're in. And so I'm looking of, okay, now that I've loaded you with 30 pounds, are you able to then transfer force from your foot to your hand and express that into a medicine ball into the wall? And how did that actually transfer through your core? Are we in the right positions? Are things clunky there? Even if we're throwing the ball overhead, we're pressing, what are we doing here? Are we actually then transferring our movements from the weight room, quote unquote, into a closer to more complex human movement? So those are the indicators I'm honestly looking for more in those movements. And if it takes us to compromise movement the way I want it to be to express power, then I know, okay, we need to reset somehow. Either that could be progression of movement or it could be progression of weight. So those are bigger indicators to me than picking the actual weight. So I don't let them get away with bad movement very often. And so those are very quick signs for me to, all right, let's back it way down. We haven't figured this movement piece out yet. Or it's simply hey, this is a force power kind of day, or this is a power day, or this is a speed power day. So that's my way of not answering the question, I guess.
Okay. No, hey, look, Coach Boyle, that's how Coach Boyle would answer in terms of it's the eye test too. Like you said, we still have to be coaching. It's still the art of coaching. And we're talking to a scientist here who is talking about this. So it just reinforces that piece of it. So excellent. You mentioned complex training, and I wanted you to get into a little more details about the complex training. So just talk about what you did with her. You said you did like a barbell squat, right? You said with the medicine ball. Okay. So what is the weight on that? Are you saying we're going for heavy for that, or are you doing a percentage of the weight? For the first exercise, what should the weight be?
It really depends. It could be anything from 95% of the 1 rep max to 30%. I guess I'll maybe answer this more broadly. When I'm training for power, I cover this in the video, but it goes back to like what aspect of the force velocity curve are we going after? Now, if you don't know, or you're kind of just like, I think I'm kind of good at everything, I don't have a major gap, then I would actually recommend intentionally training over that spectrum as much as you can. And so then my answer to your question is exactly that. If I don't have like a specific need that because I don't know, or there isn't a specific need, I'm going to try to challenge them over and across that broad spectrum, that 30 to 90%. That's what I'm going to do. So I might do something like put on your front squat, and like I'll just give you an example yesterday. Her front squats, she was doing doubles. We probably did 12 sets of doubles, something like that. And then so it was a bit of a movement complex combined with complex training, which gets a bit wordy, but I'll explain to you what it is rather than use the names. But so she would do probably somewhere in the neighborhood, I'd have to go back and look, but 75%, 80% of her 1 rep max for her front squat. And she would do it for a single. Then she would jerk it twice. So she would do the full jerk twice and then set that down. And then she would do her medicine ball throws. These are horizontal kind of rotational two-handed scoop throws against the wall. And then she'd do a couple of these sides. So the entire complex was 5 repetitions. So 1 squat, 2 jerks. So she jerked once with each leg going forward, and then a left throw and then a right throw. And so the squat was somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 kilos. Then we would take a little bit of weight off. She would jerk 50 kilos, somewhere in there, and throw 20 pounds. But then we worked up. And so we worked up to even closer to like 95. No, that's a lie. 85, 90% of her 1 rep max on the squat for a single. Dropped all the way down to 25 kilos. So, really 20% or so of her jerk. Did some really light jerks and then threw an 8-pound medicine ball. And so it sounds like I'm just like picking random shit out of my head there. I wasn't. It was very specific. But kind of what we did is this. I dosed her with a heavy squat and then followed it up with a very light jerk and a very light medicine ball throw. Then I dosed her with a heavy squat, heavy jerk, light medicine ball throw. Then it was heavy squat, heavy jerk, light medicine ball throw, or all the way up. And then the strength of the squat got higher. So we got up. Once her movement quality is perfect the entire time. But once we weren't getting that kind of like maximum drive out of the squat, and the jerks started to get like okay power wise, technique wise, they're fine, but okay power wise. Then we dropped, and we finished the session going all the way back down to probably 50% of her 1 rep max on the front squat, and she would do kind of a single double, and I don't ever have exact numbers, so it's kind of like do 1, 2, 3 reps, like good, whatever that takes. If 2 is great, let's do a third. If 2 is okay, we're stopping at 2.
Yeah.
And sometimes I let her do that, sometimes I stop her. Right, it's like, okay, that was good, set that down, crush the jerk. Okay, the jerk was okay, all right, fine, set it down. Or jerk was great, let's take it off, whatever, and then throw the medicine ball. And so the point was I intentionally dosed her across her front squat, her jerk, and her horizontal throws. All of those got exposed to at heavy, medium, and light. That was the overarching point of the day is she needed to be exposed to all those things, and I wanted her to be able to express power in all those domains in multiple movement patterns, kind of going back and forth. And so, and then I almost always like to finish super light and fast, almost always. So she finished really, really light and fast, and those were, again, 1 to 3 reps each, something like that. And we end up probably doing 10 to 12 rounds, which for her is just like literally nothing. And she's just like, okay, when are we going to train now? And I'm like, go home now. She's like, what? Like, we did more than that, but that's because they're so painfully used to everything being, it's not a workout unless you're throwing up,
Yeah.
But this is not the focus right now. So it's power development stuff. So, but that was good. So that's kind of how we dosed there.
Yeah. Is there like a standard that you use a rest between the exercises? So between the squat, the jerk, and the med ball, does it matter, or did you have a specific rest?
So with those, we're going to probably pick something that's in the realm of what would be considered a cluster set. So if you look into the literature, if you're listening at home and you are like, what's a cluster set? Google around that one. It's a really, really beneficial little tip or technique you can use for strength or power. And in fact, I think a new study came out showing it's actually pretty decent for hypertrophy too. But for at least for power and strength and speed, it's very well shown as effective. And so what this practically means is somewhere between 10 and 20 seconds in between kind of each rep. Having said that, in reality, it's all eye test, right? And there was actually several times where I stopped her. And so she would do like 1 squat. And I said, stop, rack it back out, reset your mind, get your breath back. Not that she's out of breath, but just because like the pop wasn't there. Then re-rack, come back out, do it again. I did that several times between jerks. So she did one jerk, and I was like, stop, re-rack it, blow it out, reset, come back and do it again. And so I don't really care if it's more than that time. She's not like rushing to do one. It's just kind of like does the jerk, boom, re-racks it, blows it out, kind of grabs her grip or whatever, grabs her ball, remembers what she's cueing, remembers what she's thinking, and then bam. And if that takes 5 seconds or 20, I don't really care. If it takes probably more than 20, 25 seconds, I'm probably going to start asking questions. Like, are you getting tired? Like, what's going on? What are we doing here? Or are you just like not focusing? Are you messing around? That's not what I'm looking for. But in this particular case, the athlete, she's hyper-focused consistently. So if she's just like delaying or sitting there not doing much, I know 100% she's trying to remember her cues and trying to like, she's visualizing the snap and the power and the pop. So probably not going to mess with her too much.
And so the rest between sets would be like you talked about before, that 2 to 5 minutes, right, in between.
Yeah. In her case, in this particular workout, it was a lot less than that. We were judging it by like how long does she drop, right? Does she continue to hit these numbers? And she wasn't. And again, her power endurance is actually screaming high, and her like she actually just ran a she just did a 10K. No, just did a 5K not too long ago, just on a whim, and won first place in her entire division.
No way.
Category.
Wow.
So like her fitness is just out of control, and she's not even in camp shape right now. And she just like showed up and did it. Doesn't run at all or anything. So with her, like it gets a lot lower because she can maintain those things over time. She'll kind of basically do the set. We'll talk about it if we need to. We'll go over, whatever stuff we have to. Then if not, it's sort of just like, okay, take it back out, grab a drink, and get back to it. And these were all, again, pretty sub-maximal. So certainly 5 minutes would have driven her nuts.
Yeah.
Like a minute was probably pressing. But, she can tie her shoe. She's, in this particular case, I don't mind. Like she's going to go, she usually films everything. So she'll go back and she'll watch the film a little bit and she'll look at it. Okay, great. Yeah, I did this. So I'm not like, I don't clock it. I don't watch it. But again, if she starts to move, reduce quality in terms of movement or power output, then I'll probably say, I gotta sit down, take a longer break here.
Yeah.
But honestly, reality of with her, if I said that, she'd probably look me at the eye and strangle me. Yeah. And then she'd go back, probably like do the best rep she's ever done in her life. So
yeah.
Like she doesn't, if I told her like, oh, you're getting tired here, she'd be like, oh, I'm not. And so,
exactly.
It's one of those things like it's just not good to do that with her.
Yeah.
So,
can you just give us a little bit of what, because again, these definitions, they get a little bit mixed up. All right. So contrast, I've heard people kind of refer to this similar as a contrast training, but it's not the same as contrast training. We talked about complex training. Can you just go over a sample of contrast training, how you would do it with her? Let's use her as an example.
So this is a good example. I have to cover this in my class every year. There are some things in sports science that I'll call them that coaches and scientists pretty well agree on. No one really disputes what hypertrophy is, right? Like when you say hypertrophy and Coach Boyle says hypertrophy, like we're pretty much on the same page, right? When you say strength and Mike Boyle says strength, we may actually be slightly on a different page there. Okay, but we're probably like 90% overlapped. We basically are agreeing what we're saying, but he may say, okay, different things of expression of strength are different. When you get to things like this, complex contrast, complementary, French contrast, it gets very squirrely. It gets very, very squirrely. And so I don't really care what you use. I'll tell you what the research says, but that doesn't mean it's right. Because most of these terms actually were adopted in the coaching community far before the research community. So depending on, and I've had this problem reviewing scientific papers. if the authors or the scientists are from Australia, they're probably going to use a different term than we use here in America. And that's certainly different than how they're going to use it in the UK and certainly in more Eastern Bloc. So on one hand, I violate contrast and complex all the time. In class, I don't even teach the difference. Just like, okay, it's like kind of the same thing, right? Technically, if you're looking, what we would typically say is when we talk about complex, you're meaning one of three things. Okay, complex is either like a complex movement, which is multiple movement patterns, for example, or at least multiple joints. Right, so a complex movement versus an isolated movement. That's a squat versus a leg extension. Okay, that's not what we're talking about here when we say complex. In the weightlifting or powerlifting community, especially weightlifting, if you say complex, you're meaning combining multiple exercises in one set. So you might do a complex, which is like, okay, 3 squats, 2 jerks, 1 squat, and 1 more jerk, and then a clean pull or something. And you do those all consecutively, where you're doing kind of multiple exercises in the same quote unquote complex. That confuses a lot of people. That's not what we're talking about here either. And so those are two very acceptable ways to use the term complex. But what we're talking about here, complex, is the more classic scientific original definition of it, which is that you use a very heavy or heavy-ish movement pattern for typically 1 to 3 reps or so, and then do oftentimes a plyometric or similar movement immediately after it in the almost exact same movement plan or similar, right? And so examples are endless. You could do a trap bar deadlift, 2 reps, 80%. As soon as you're done with your second repetition, stop and do 2 vertical jumps as high as you can. Or it could be a broad jump, or it could be throw a baseball. It could be whatever. In our case, a lot of times we'll use that to throw a kick into a bag or punches or something. It could be a bench press coupled with a medicine ball chest press. It could be any combination of pull-up coupled with a medicine ball slam. These things have been taken over in what a lot of coaches are now calling PAP, which stands for post-activation potentiation. And that's not the name of the training style. That's the name of what we think is happening physiologically. But the training style is effectively the same thing, right? Which is you're using a high force movement to try to activate more motor units. And then while those motor units are still activated, you follow it up with a complementary movement designed for speed or power to try to actually induce greater power or speed output with those further activated motor neurons. If we then, once we understand those sort of different definitions of the word complex, we can then move into contrast. And most of the time, although I'll have to admit, I'm actually interested in what you think contrast is, because I've heard people say this thing differently. But typically when we say contrast, we're looking at things like within from set to set variation. So in weightlifting, we call this a wave, but it would be something like I do a front squat at 80% for one set. And then the next set of front squats, I would drop down to 50%.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking that the definition was.
That's what most people call contrast training. But again, people use it. People use them interchangeably. People mean them different. But that would be a standard, again, wave. So you might do, in this example, and we kind of did a wave. So actually, with Tatiana yesterday, we did contrast and complex, because we were waving the intensities within the set and we were doing immediate complex training, right? Yeah. So we were doing a little bit of both. Yeah. So a very standard contrast training method is what we call high, medium, low, or high, medium, low, very low. And so imagine you're doing 8 sets. And you can do 8 sets of 2 of deadlifts with the trap bar deadlift. Okay, doesn't matter. And so set 1 would be heavy. You might do it at 80%. Set 2 is medium, so then you do it at 50%. Set 3 is light, maybe 30%. And set 4 is very light at 10%. And then you'd go back and you'd wave again. So then you go back to 80% for set 5, back to 50% for set 6, et cetera, et cetera. You don't have to start heavy. You don't have to start. You could start really with heavy, medium, light, or light. You could do heavy, medium, light. You could do heavy, medium, very light. You could really do whatever you'd like to do. Very, very standard in weightlifting. I think it's phenomenal for power development. because again, you're training that full power spectrum. You're getting the entire thing accomplished, which is really, really helpful. So for a non-specific athlete, it's a win. The other thing, I mean, I could talk a lot about what I like about it, but another thing I like about contrast training like this is it really challenges the athlete to focus. Because if you're not really paying attention to kind of what you're doing and you aren't really there, it's tough. You also get to practice the movement a lot with very little load. So in that heavy, medium, light, very light example, over 50% of your reps are light or less.
Yeah.
And so it's really nice to practice expression of speed and power. But you can get a lot of work done. You get a lot of reps done. You keep people busy. Downside is it takes a long time and it's a pain in the ass changing the weight every set.
Yeah.
But both of those methods, I think, are very, very good, depending on kind of what you're attempting to go after.
Yeah. Good stuff. I want to skip over to you were talking about in a different video, but about Lee Brown's work with like a wiffle ball bat. And now I'm kind of understanding why a baseball player the donut on the bat wouldn't be as good as the wiffle ball bat, because he's focusing on that other end of the spectrum, right?
Yeah.
The force velocity curve. So now I kind of get that. And I know in the golf world, and we were actually talking about this on the podcast with Coach Boyle, and there was a thread about the speed sticks, about using, this overspeed and underspeed idea. Overspeed, which is really assisted, I guess, no matter what. Technically, a wiffle ball bat would be considered assisted, right?
Well, yeah, basically, yeah.
Right.
Assisted overspeed, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Okay. So can you just kind of give us an overview just of this idea with, resisted versus assisted?
Sure. So, okay. You did a nice job of kind of setting up the question, but when we think about power, it's force, velocity. Okay. Strength is easy because that's pure force. Speed is easy because it's pure velocity. Power is this unique combination of where we're at. So if we're trying to achieve more speed, we can actually break that down further. And I don't know if you caught this video, but I have a separate video about this topic specifically. So you can go back to that. I'll give you the highlights here. But you can get more detail in that video. Okay, when we look at speed, there's often two major components. It's maximum velocity, or what I'll call top end velocity, peak velocity, however you want to say it. And then there's acceleration. Well, the nice part about it is acceleration is also half of force, because force is mass times acceleration. Okay, well, if you're looking to get faster, well, the only way to go faster in terms of max velocity is to actually practice max velocity. If you add resistance, you're slowing yourself down. You can't get better at going faster by slowing yourself down, unless the reason you can't go fast is you can't produce enough force. And this is why we'll see, Charlie Francis made this abundantly clear, right? You have to be strong to be fast at some point, right? Now, do you need to squat 700 pounds like Ben Johnson? Don't know about that, but in order to be able to produce some speed, there has to be some force component. But let's assume you're strong enough. Well, then getting stronger doesn't make you faster. And so that sounds like I just contradict myself. I didn't, right? If you're strong enough, then getting stronger won't make you faster. But if you're not strong enough, getting stronger will make you faster. So everything is about context here, right? So if you're strong enough, let's assume you are, or close, the only way to actually get faster, that maximum velocity, is to actually practice at that maximum velocity or over the maximum velocity. So you need to get better at moving faster. So in this particular case, adding resistance doesn't solve your problem. It doesn't matter if this resistance comes in the force of squatting, comes in the place, of dragging a sled, or towing someone behind you as you're sprinting, or using a parachute to sprint, or whatever. It's all slowing you down. The opposite of the spectrum is, let's go over speed, or what we call give you some assistance. So instead of you pulling the sled or you dragging someone, let's have someone drag you. Instead of adding resistance to your vertical jump that pulls you down to the ground, let's add assistance that lets you jump higher than normal. Let's practice that in the spectrum. And so here's what we know, I think, is fairly clear in the research at this point. When you add resistance, it's incredibly effective for acceleration. So getting off the blocks, getting started. If you're at a sport like basketball, where there's not really much speed element to it, but there's a ton of acceleration. It is continual acceleration. Probably some level of resistance training. Again, I mean everything from weights to dragging a sled, a parachute running, something where it's a little bit of resistance, even if it's 5 pounds, it's going to be better for acceleration than top end velocity work. But if you're in a position where top end velocity is the actual outcome that you're after, adding resistance does the opposite. In this case, adding assistance is where you want to go. So think of a soccer player. Depending on the position you play, it's a lot of acceleration, but there is some times when you may sprint 40, 50, 60 meters, something like this. So adding something there, certainly 100 meter, 200 meter sprinters. Some positions in football, corner and wide receivers specifically, there's a need for some top end velocity. Offensive linemen probably have no need at all for top end velocity for the most part. Doesn't mean they can't ever do it, but it's not a huge need. In my sport, MMA, boxing, there's no need for top end velocity, really. It's most acceleration stuff. So point being though, do assistance. So if we look at I had to kind of build that back to answer your question directly. I promise I didn't forget your question. So if we understand that then, and we're trying to go after power, we have to go, okay, what is stopping my power production? If adding peak velocity, which is half of power, is really needed, and the half of the power the power that I need is velocity, well, then that probably means you don't need acceleration, because remember, acceleration is very well coupled to force production. So if you're already strong and that part's taken care of, what you probably need for power is actually more top end velocity, which means you need to implement a little bit more assistance training. Now, I know with Major League Baseball players, they do this a ton. Throwers will do this with like a slightly overloaded or underloaded ball. Mm-hmm. So, they use a 4-ounce ball or 6-ounce or an 8-ounce ball, or to do things like this. So I wouldn't say that a donut is worse than a wiffle ball bat. I would say both have their place. We have to understand how we're using them. So with Lee's, original research, it pretty clearly showed that if you swing that wiffle ball bat first, then swing your baseball bat, rather than swinging the baseball bat after you swing with a donut or a loaded weight. I mean, that just highlighted, and then at least 20 or so studies after that, they all highlighted a similar thing, which is not that assistance or resistance is better for you, but it has an important place in the conversation. All of these should be there. And if we look at what, even some of my research looking at heavy banded deadlifts, I'm not talking like TheraBands around the knees, I'm talking like heavy bands on the ground, chains. They change the force velocity curve quite a bit. And so it all needs to be part of your equation. You just have to understand what problem are you solving, and then you deploy the tactic that is best apt to solve that particular issue.
I got a question just based on that too. Let's go back to complex training really quick, just because if a wiffle ball is better for that,
better for velocity,
would I be able to reverse the complex training to get some? So in other words, do my plyometric first, and then right after do the heavy, the deadlift.
It won't help your force production in your deadlift. So that's some of the issues. You could do them in reverse, but it won't help the deadlift much, because remember, doing the speed thing first helps you with speed, but when you go to lift heavy, that's not really related to speed as it is force production. Yeah. So it doesn't end up doing much. The physiology, as best we understand it now, is, again, the heavy thing actually turns on more motor units that you can then kind of keep on when you go to do the fast thing. But the fast thing may not have that same effect. And so it may not have it there. Now, what I will say is we don't have a tremendous amount of research on that. So I would listen to it if it happened. In this particular case, since we don't have the research, I would go and say, based on what we understand now, I don't think that'll help. Based on as we understand now, I don't know of any practitioners, any athletes in strength sports that do that or have ever really done that with success. So in this case, yeah, I'm not sure, but I doubt it would do much.
Yeah. All right. Well, wow. We've been over an hour here. I can't even believe it. I just looked down and I saw that. So Andy, I want to remind everybody, Andy has all these great videos on YouTube. You can go to his site. We'll have links for that at on my site as well. So you can go back to the show notes to get some of the links for that and check out some of these videos. Does a great job with some visuals as well to kind of make you understand it. So, Andy, thank you so much for coming on and talking about these different concepts and clearing up some of the different things. And as it always, it depends. So thank you so much for coming on.
I appreciate it, man. It's my pleasure.
All right, that's going to do it for episode 271 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Remember, you can try strengthcoach.com out 3 days. Just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. To access that offer, go to strengthcoach.com, click the Join Now button to get started on your trial. Special thanks to Chris Parry and the folks over at Perform Better. Remember, right now, the huge holiday sale, up to 30% off and free shipping. Don't forget, too, the one-day seminar start January 11th in Fair Lawn, New Jersey. Check out performbetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Andy Galpin for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength and conditioning, performance enhancement, and power. Thanks to Adam Doughty, Tim Robinson, and TrainHeroic. Head over to TrainHeroic.com to start your free 14-day trial. Let them know I sent you. You'll save 10% off the first year of the TrainHeroic Pro or Elite Edition. Thanks to Rachel Cosgrove for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. Check them out at resultsfitnessuniversity.com. My name's Anthony Rena. My new book, Be Like the Best, consists of 50 interviews with top fitness pros. And after each interview is a Be Like, which is just an action step or a challenge that'll help you be like the best. I also have the Be Like the Best workbook, which is just a collection of those Be Likes with room for notes. So you can check all that out and all my other resources at continuefit.com. That's going to do it for this episode. Thanks for listening, and I'll speak to you next time.